Welcome back to the Send 938 Missions Podcast, a ministry of Baptist Missions designed to encourage, equip, and inspire the next generation of missionary servants and the churches who will send them. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, Administrator for Church Engagement and Communications here in sunny Cleveland, Ohio at the Baptist Missions Global Ministry Center in our brand new recording studio. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. You've only missed one episode in video format before, and I apologize now for having to look at me if you've enjoyed listening to me for the last 130-some episodes that we've done of this podcast. If you're joining us in just audio today, what are you doing out there? We're on YouTube now. Go find the channel, BapMid on YouTube, and you can find yourself looking me square in the eyes for the rest of this episode. And no matter what streaming platform or video platform you're watching and listening on today, make sure to leave us a like, share this with someone, and go ahead and hit that subscribe button because it is going to help us grow the channel and accomplish what we intend to here, which is grow the influence and efficacy of Baptist Missions resourcing ministries from our Global Ministry Center team here in Cleveland. Here's the question for today, and I apologize if you came on looking for a guest interview, which is so familiar to those of us, again, who have listened for a while, but here's the question for today in this monologue-style Ben Shapiro-esque episode. What if we've been sending our best and brightest church planters to the wrong location? Truth of the matter is that a few weeks ago, we wrapped up a week-long resource training program here at the Global Ministry Center called Shepherding Healthy Renewal. It's a program that we've developed over the last few years. Dr. Jason Ormiston, Dr. Dennis Wilkening, Pastor Mike Hickson, Josh Putnam from CBM was here helping us. We had a group of guys who are experienced in church revitalization work come together to help resource and train other pastors and missionaries in that vital effort. And again, I'll say this, if you've been listening to the program for a while, you know my heartbeat is as a pastor who worked in a revitalization ministry. I didn't know that when I took the pastoral role that God led our family to in 2009. I've said before, the church showed me all the red flags they wanted to show me. I just apparently was colorblind. But I walked into a ministry assignment that I didn't really have a full appreciation for in terms of what was needed or how we were going to manage to grow that ministry. But it was in a rural setting, which for a long time, including all of my seminary training, I had said to myself and to others, I think I'm better suited for rural ministry, not urban ministry. Now, as a counterpoint to this, Dr. Jason Ormiston, who is my church planting director, or director for church planting and development, I should say, here at Baptist Missions, has a doctorate in urban ministry. So he and I have gone back and forth on this question and discussion, and during our resource training a few weeks ago, this question came up. Where should we focus our attention in church planting and revitalization? Now, I'm not going to disagree with Jason because he's way smarter than I am. And I'm not going to actually disagree with a lot of church planting experts out there who have written extensively on the strategic opportunity that exists in urban church planting and church revitalization. Oftentimes what we hear, and maybe what we're most familiar with, is the idea that strategically speaking, in the cities, we can reach the nations. And certainly the numbers support that. But I think there is a failure or maybe an absence of appreciation that this isn't an either-or strategic opportunity. This has to be a both-and. Because the fact of the matter is that a group of people in diaspora from Turkey, for example, in Berlin, are no less needy than a diminishing population in a mill town in southern Ohio. Where there are needy souls, we have a Great Commission which really directs our understanding that, in fact, not every gospel opportunity is the consequence of the most strategic assessment. As a primary example of that, we might say what Jesus told us about the way a shepherd treats the one who is lost. He leaves the 99 to go seek that one. Many would look at that and say, well, strategically speaking, I probably better give my attention to the 99 just to make sure that I don't lose one more while I'm out there searching for that one lost sheep. Gospel ministry is not about all of the purposeful planning and strategic preparation that we can muster, producing results that we desire. Gospel ministry really is about going where there is need. we consider Jesus' own perspective from the end of Luke chapter 9, for example, Jesus looked out over the masses of people, and his heart, his stomach was actually turned. It was kind of a gut-wrenching moment as he recognized the need that existed for those who looked to him as sheep who were without a shepherd. And it's not long after that experience that Jesus gives his disciples direction that really shapes our understanding of the opportunities that are in front of us when he says, look, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Let me ask you where a plentiful harvest comes from. You just stop and think about that for a minute. It's kind of obvious. And in fact, often we assign an understanding of Jesus' parable of the soils without consideration of his later statements about plentiful harvests. So where does a plentiful harvest come from? It doesn't usually come from the roadside soil in the ditch. It doesn't come from the weedy soil. It doesn't come from the rocky soil. It comes from the good soil, the soil that's been cultivated, prepared, engaged. And certainly we're talking about spiritual components here of an individual's heart. But in terms of a broader community level understanding of where there are those who are most receptive to the gospel, I would just ask you to answer the question, is that generally in an urban setting or a rural setting? And my point or my thesis in all of this is to get here. I think rural America is in fact low-hanging fruit for gospel opportunity. And there are those who have certainly bypassed that low-hanging fruit on their way to what was considered to be the most strategic opportunity. I'm going to reach the nations in the cities. And on the way to the city, lots of small towns were forgotten, lots of opportunities were missed, and lots of those amongst whom seed might have been planted and brought forth fruitful harvesting were missed. Again, it's not an either or. I'm not making the advocation here that we should abandon the cities in pursuit of rural areas. But the fact of the matter is that particularly in America, and of course, actually, I should make clear at this point, I'm actually talking specifically about the North American context here. But we certainly have to simply acknowledge that America is a nation that is in need today in ways that it has not been spiritually in need in past generations. That is to say, America has experienced a few great awakening type of moments, the consequence of revivals that have brought forth movements in both the church and American culture or society that have made people at various other times in our existence more responsive and receptive to gospel provocation or conviction. We're living in a day and age where I think we are beginning to see, and we actually have a great episode in this in our audio catalog if you want to go back and listen to it. We're living in a day and age where I think we are experiencing the beginnings of what could blossom into a genuine spiritual revival in this nation. Most of those who would be today considered most receptive because of their familiarity with gospel truths, their acceptance of gospel morality, their acknowledgement of where that moral authority comes from in the existence of a creator and God. Most of that disposition dwells outside of urban centers. If we assign our understanding of theological, biblical, moral, righteous standards to people groups and places, there are not too many who would look and say, obviously, the urban centers are the place where the greatest awareness of moral, righteous standards exists today. Most of us, when we think about rural and urban, we tend to put it in political concepts. Urban America, this is the political disposition. Rural America, that's the political disposition. Well, I think there is an opportunity for us without judgment about this. It's just the reality of the condition of people's hearts. I think there is an opportunity for us to look very broadly at the world that we're looking at today in America and say in an urban center, we can assume there is a disposition towards God that is different than the rural disposition. And let me give you just a primary example of that without assigning any quality of an individual's heart. I pastored in a rural area where it was not uncommon to see people who I knew were unredeemed. They would have acknowledged that they were not in a right relationship with the Lord, driving around with a pickup truck with a silhouette of a cowboy kneeling at a cross and a horse standing behind him, because that was the disposition. We know God exists. I don't have to live for him. I don't have to turn to him in repentant faith. I'm not a redeemed person, but I know he exists, and I'm not going to deny that he doesn't. What does all of this mean for us? Where does this put us? Well, I started with an acknowledgement that the thinking about this came out of our recent Shepherding Healthy Renewal training, and that's because in rural America, we are seeing a growing decrease or exodus of gospel influence like never before. And I mean that in reference to the presence of gospel preaching churches. There are lots of studies out there that articulate some estimate of the number of churches that are planted versus the number of churches that are closing. Some very high estimates put 100,000 churches in the next few years are going to close. I think those are probably unsubstantiated claims. But at the very minimum, we can look at some reasonable surveys that have been done recently by Lifeway or Tom Rainer and say we're probably looking at about 4,000 evangelical churches a year closing at a low number, and we're seeing less than 4,000, like maybe 3,200 to 3,500 churches started. The majority of churches that are closing in rural areas where population centers are diminishing, and the majority of churches that are being planted in population centers or urban centers where the population is increasing. Again, that trend seems to match a kind of strategic approach. We want to go where the people are, right? Except gospel ministry is not always about going where the people are in mass. It's about going where there are receptive hearts. How will we find the harvest that is plentiful? We have to step into cultivated fields. Where can the cultivation be accomplished? Not easily. Certainly we're not looking for ease in all of this. But where do we look to cultivate soil? It's in the field. It's not the road. It's not the rocky soil. It's not the weedy patches. Those places could be cultivated, and in fact, I would suggest need to be cultivated. But they don't need to be cultivated at the expense of doing the work in the field that could be cultivated and ripe unto harvest soon. This is where it has to be brought back to an acknowledgement before anyone else gets there in the comment section. This is a both and conversation. Dr. Ormiston, Jason Ormiston, and I have, again, gone back and forth on this in brief in recent days, and some during that session. We've actually talked about it before, and I was impressed by the fact that there were some in the Shepherding Healthy Renewal training who were coming from organizations who have actually particularly and purposefully focused on church revitalization and church planting in rural areas for the very reasons that I've listed. They didn't want to step over fertile soil in order to go find the rockiest, hardest, weediest place that they could put down roots. They said, here's a place where there appears to be an open door, and I'm not going to bypass it and the opportunity for a harvest here in order to go there. Remember, when Jesus entered this world, he stepped out of eternity past into time and space. He didn't step into what we might consider to be the most strategic location. He stepped into a rural, backwoods setting. And actually, up until recently, modern missions or missiology has focused extensively on frontier pioneer ministry in rural settings. Where did William Haas, the founder of Baptist Missions, go? He didn't go to the major cities, not that in 1920 there were that many highly developed in Africa, But he didn't go to the major cities. He didn't go to the major population centers. He didn't go to the places where governments were established and operating, whether they were local or international governance. He went to the most unreached places. And I'm going to suggest to you that even here in North America, as a former administrator for our North American ministry team, I'm well aware of the fact that around 1937, I believe, our first ministries in North America were known as Baptist Bend Missions Appalachian Ministries. In fact, one of the poorest counties in the entire country is the place where we started, and it's still one of the poorest counties in the entire country, is where we started our ministry. And it was a ministry of itinerant preaching and children's discipleship or evangelism in local one-room schoolhouses. We had a four-wheel drive Suburban, couple of families who were going every single day to different one-room schoolhouses to do Bible lessons with students. And out of that, about 17 churches were eventually started. There was a time when we thought about rural ministry as being strategic. And it was strategic because we said there's a need there. And what I'm getting at today is not an argument about the opportunity that exists in urban centers. I'm certainly not suggesting it's one or the other. I'm certainly not suggesting that it is better to do ministry in rural areas. What I'm suggesting is it's probably worth every one of us thinking very carefully about why we think urban centers are the best place to do ministry. And I'm going to just tell you, there's lots of people you're going to read, books you can pick up, articles that have been written, podcasts that have been conducted about why urban ministry should be prioritized. And I'm suggesting that in the day and age in which we're living, the mass of disappearance of organized gospel presence in communities looks to me like it's taking place in rural America. And for that reason and many more, I think rural America is worth taking another look at for gospel ministry, whether it's revitalization or church planting. And you say, well, boy, that's going to be hard, isn't it? Yep, probably. But urban ministry is also hard. There's nothing easy about it. I think I could speak for a few church planters who I have had very candid conversations with in the last few years and simply say, suburban America, the middle between rural and urban, is often the place that is easiest to plant in. You have a wealthy, up-and-coming, middle-class community with resources and people and families. You have a kind of general cultural respectability about it that makes engagement in certain things easier than it is in rural communities that are often closed to outsiders or urban communities that are closed because of personal protective matters. I said this to someone the other day, but you can live in a community where people close their doors when they get in their house and lock them, and they close their doors when they get out of their house and lock them. Or you could live in a community where 3 of your neighbors have the passcode to your garage door. I'm going to suggest to you that in one of those communities, and you can figure out which one is which, one of those communities, it might actually be easier to do personal evangelism and discipleship. No ministry assignment should ever be considered easy. Even those that seem to get off the ground quickly and grow fruit inordinately aren't easy ministries. Because ultimately what we're doing is we are cultivating soil, we are planting seed, we are watering, and we are waiting on the Lord to give the increase. Where is the harvest field? It's everywhere. Where is there fruit waiting to be harvested? It's coming out of soil that is fertile and has been prepared. Seed has been planted, water has been given, and now fruit is coming forth. Sometimes that's in urban settings. Sometimes that's in rural settings. Sometimes that's in suburban settings. Fact of the matter is, no one place is better than the other. And I'm not trying to make the argument that every minister of the gospel should head to a rural setting and start doing ministry. I'm simply asking the question, why aren't we thinking more about rural North America? And as always, if today's episode has provoked your thinking, we'd love to hear from you. You can drop a comment below or send us your questions at send938@bmm.org. And no matter what streaming platform you're listening or watching on today, if you'd share this episode, give us a like, and tell friends and family about what's going on at the Send 938 Missions podcast, we'd appreciate it. And we'll see you back here next time.